Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over JavaScript 6th edition, the Web Warrior series by Vodnik and Gosselin, and we're up to Chapter 8 of 12, which is on JavaScript strings and arrays. Now, we've already had a chapter where we went over arrays, but this one will go into them in more depth and breadth of coverage. So, our four objectives: manipulate strings with properties and methods of the string object, create regular expressions and use them to validate user input, manipulate arrays with properties and methods of the array object, and convert between strings and arrays and between strings and JSON, which is the JavaScript object notation. I just want to mention, and I know I've been pushing this at you, but again, going back to what I'd shown you before, where is that? Closed it. There we go. Notice that we have a whole chapter here on JavaScript arrays, including all of the major JavaScript array methods, which are shown here. All right. In addition, we have another chapter in this tutorial on JavaScript strings. Once again, including the major string methods, which are shown here. All right. And finally, what's in here is JSON, JavaScript object notation. So again, if you want a kind of a one-stop shop to get started on this stuff, this is going to be probably about as good as it gets. All right. End of sermon. All right. So a string is any text between double quotes or single quotes. Okay. You must, if it starts with a single quote, it must end with a single quote. If it starts with a double quote, it must end with a double quote. All right. So there's a couple examples on the bottom of the page. When you parse a string, typically you're going through a string looking for something. For instance, if my string happened to be the Gettysburg Address, all right, maybe I wanted to see inside of the Gettysburg Address how many times the word slavery was used, something like that. All right, so then that would be a substring. Now a better example probably would be if I had a sentence like, hello, my favorite color is yellow. Okay, and if somebody wanted to know if the substring LLO was in there, well, it's in there under hello, and it's there under yellow. So I could search that. So when you go through a string, however big the string is, and you're looking for some kind of pattern or something that's in there, that's a substring. The string class has a lot of methods to go through and do this. The string class also has a lot of methods to format strings, to do things like put a string into uppercase or put it into lowercase. And there are plenty of other things as well. Notice that they're talking about char code or from char code, and they talk about the Unicode character codes. I don't want to bore you, but just let me tell you very quickly that a long time ago, the character set that was used for all computers was the ASCII character set, ASCII. I think that's the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. And it was 8-bit. The problem with that is it could only hold 256 characters. So it held all of the numbers, all of the letters, all of the special characters, uppercase and lowercase letters, etc. In fact, I can go out here if I want to, just to show you quickly. Bring up another browser here, and I'm going to type in ASCII character codes. And there it is. All right, I'm not going to do anything with these, but just so you see them, there they are. The problem is, as time has gone on, as you all know, we're not a national whatever you call us anymore. We're international. So in other words, this doesn't account for characters from other letters. So a while back, the ASCII character set, and it still is there, it's still around, okay? But the ASCII character set in some ways was replaced by the Unicode character set, which originally had 65,536 possible codes. So when you go from 256 to 65,536 or whatever the heck it is, that's a pretty big jump. And now from what I last heard, I think the Unicode character set is up to over 100,000 characters. Now, it shouldn't surprise you to hear that the first 256 characters used in the Unicode character set are the ones from the ASCII character set that you see right in front of you. Alright, so again, ASCII is defined, or designed, I should say, to handle every language that currently exists. Alright, other things you can do with strings. Alright, you can convert a string to uppercase, you can convert a string to lowercase as examples. Now, that said, please take a look at what is on the screen. And notice that the T in 2 is lowercase, but the L in lower, the U in upper, and the C in case are uppercase. And again, we're using what's called camel case. And JavaScript is a case-sensitive language, so you have to type them in that way. If you put them all in uppercase or all in lowercase, or you don't mix the cases as shown, it won't work. Strings have a length property. Alright, that basically, as you would guess, so they have your kingdom of Monaco, and they say it's 18, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Alright, when you're looking through a string for a substring, here are some of the methods that you can use. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list. Charat. Charat is often used, in fact, I'll show that probably later in some examples, where if the user does something and you put the code in a loop and you ask the user if they want to do it again, and you tell them to enter a Y if they do, and an N if they don't, or a Y if they do, and anything else if they don't. Well, you might tell them to enter a Y, but what if they type in yes instead of Y? Then I can use Charat to just pluck off the first character of their input and see whether or not it's a Y. In fact, I can pluck it off, and we don't know if it'll be an uppercase or a lowercase Y, so I can pluck it off and convert it to uppercase and then just check for uppercase, or convert it to lowercase and just check for lowercase. Here's more. So again, you see there are a boatload of different methods that you can use to work your way through the string class. And here's some examples of running these things. So notice Charat 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alright, the character code is 40, so 40, if we went back and looked at the ASCII character code, must be the @ sign. The index of com, so where does that start? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There's the C in com. Alright? Where's the last time an E shows? And you can see it's at character 12. Where do you find the @ sign? And it's at character 5. Alright? Then they show two different ways that you can slice. Now this says -11, so it says, I believe, count backwards. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In fact, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Alright, and you can do the substring. Again, it says start at 6 and go through 13. So there's a lot of ways that you can do different things in here. Alright, now As it says right here, there are two types of string methods. Those that return a numeric position in a text string, and those that return a character or substring. So in other words, do you want to know where something is located, or do you want to know what is actually located there? So in other words, if I typed in my name, if I typed in Jeffrey Paul Scott, and I wanted to know where that S was, that would return the numeric position. If I wanted to know what existed at a certain position, that would return a letter. So this returns the position. Index of is an example. Search is an example. This returns the character. So substring or slice. Again, these aren't going to make a lot of sense until you start seeing them in action and you work with them in class. All right? I think that probably what I'll end up doing here, I wasn't going to do this, but I believe, again, if I go back, as I have done several times before, if I go back in here and I type in W3 schools, string methods, I'm going to get a big listing. It's got JavaScript string methods. That'll work. All right, so we'll take a look at these later. Again, we mentioned slice. Notice slice allows negative argument values. So it says, do you want to, if you start something with a negative number, you're saying start from the end. So here's an example. All right, so we want the domain name. So we're saying go back 14 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 characters. And go until there's 4 characters left. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're saying grab everything that's there in White House. Okay. There's a replace method. That should be pretty obvious what that does. It's very similar to a search and replace that you'd have in a word processing program. You can combine strings together using the plus sign. We talked about this in a much earlier chapter. You can also concatenate two strings together with a plus equal sign. And here are some examples. Notice you can use either concat or you can use the plus sign. And in both cases, you get the same result. Now, we've talked a little bit about comparisons before, and notice, again, if you want to compare two values, we looked at this in an earlier lecture, and you want to make sure that not only do they contain the same value, but they're the same data type, you don't use a double equal sign, you use a triple equal sign. All right, there's also a local compare method, as you can see here, which compares strings according to whatever the order is for that particular country, that particular language. All right, regular expressions. As we go into regular expressions, I just want to mention, I go to this site all the time, which is regular-expression.info, I believe. Kind of an ugly site, but it's got virtually anything that you'd ever want to know about regular expressions. And one of the things that's in there is, where is it? Tools and languages. All right, so what language? Well, I want JavaScript. So this tells me all about how to use regular expressions with JavaScript. Is it an exhaustive reference? No, but it's a great starting place. So, in a nutshell, regular expressions are patterns that you use to match things and, if necessary, to change things. Most often, as mentioned right here, you use regular expressions when you're validating data to make sure that the the data is what you think it'll be. Here's an example. This is going to create a variable called URL protocol, and the forward slashes are delimiters. All right, so basically what that holds is the string HTTPS. You can use regular expressions with a lot of the different string methods. Okay, there's a lot of ways that regular expressions can be used. So let's see, because we just looked. Try it again. W3 schools regular expression. All right, so there's a regular expression reference. Okay, so we'll take a look at that also when we get done with this. All right. Notice that the regular expression object, often called regex, includes two different methods. Test, which as it says, returns a value of true if you had a match, and I believe false otherwise, and exec, which actually does the executing. Notice what it says. The real power of regular expressions comes from the patterns that you write with them. What you see under email pattern is kind of what you think it would be. All right. In other words, you're saying you got some numbers or letters or special characters followed by an @ sign, followed by some more numbers or letters, followed by a period, followed by 2 to 6 letters. So what this is saying is you would pass in an email address and you'd run the email pattern on it with a test. If it works, it'll return true. If it doesn't work, it'll return false. Regular expressions contain a lot of different stuff, including meta characters, which I think we're going to look at probably in the next few slides. The first thing you see there, and it looks kind of weird, but it's a period. The period matches everything. It's equivalent to the asterisk that we use a lot in DOS, the disk operating system, in Windows, etc. The backslash identifies the next character as a literal value. If that doesn't make sense, you'll see examples as we start. The caret means starts with. The $sign means ends with. Parentheses, it says, specifies required characters. Brackets specifies alternate characters. Brackets with a caret inside means exclude. The - sign can be used for a range, and the pipe sign can be used for sets. All right. Just mention, if you want to match any character, it's the period. Not used very often. If at the beginning of a pattern you put a caret, that means starts with. If in your string you end it with a $sign, that means ends with. These here are called quantifiers. A little hard to understand until you actually work with them. All right, the question mark means whatever follows is optional. The plus sign means there must be one or more. The asterisk means there can be 0 or more. If you put a number in here, just a single number, that means that you must have it that many times. So let's say that we had a password that had to be 9 characters long. You could set up your pattern, and then you could put curly brace 9 curly brace, which means it has to be exactly 9 characters. If the password has to be 9 or more characters, that's what this one means. So that's the minimum, and there is no maximum. when you put a range in here, this would be like saying your password has to be between 8 and 16 characters, something like that. All right, you can use sub-expressions or sub-patterns in here. There's a lot of stuff in here. We're not even halfway through the chapter yet. All right. You can define character classes. Again, you're going to see a lot of these as we go on in here. Now these character class expressions look a little bit weird. The ones you're going to use most often are these two. This means numbers only. This means non-numeric. The W means alphanumeric. The little w. The big W means anything that's not alphanumeric. So anything that's not a letter or a number. All right, the little s means white space characters, tab, space bar, enter key, etc. The big S means anything but those. The B is for a backspace character. So you can set up all sorts of stuff in here. And when you set up patterns, by default, the pattern finds the first match. If you want the pattern to find every match, you put a G on the end, a little G like it says. By default, when you match patterns, they're case sensitive. If you don't want them to be case sensitive, you put in lowercase I on the end. Oftentimes, you're going to end up, as it says, working with true and false, etc. when you use the regular expression constructor. All right, I guess we're switching gears now and going on to arrays. Yep, I skipped. So, arrays have a length property. You create an array by instantiating an array object. Here are some of the things you can use with arrays. You can use concat to combine two arrays together. You can use pop to remove the last element from an array. You can use push to add an element to the end of an array. You can use reverse to reverse the order of elements. All right, that becomes very important because the only way that you can put something in reverse alphabetic or reverse numeric order is to first sort it and then call reverse on it. All right. Shift, as it says, removes the first element from an array. Unshift adds one or more elements to the beginning of an array. So pop, push, shift, and unshift work alike, except one adds to the end of the array and the other adds to the beginning of the array. Sort sorts the array. Now by default, the array is sorted alphabetically, so if it's a numeric array, there's a little more work you have to do. Slice, as it says, copies a portion of an array to another array. And splice adds or removes elements within an array. Quite often, when you're going through an array to look for something, you'll use some kind of a looping statement. And inside of there, you'll use slice. Okay. So in this example, they extracted all of the states from the states array. Okay. And I guess what they did, trying to figure this out here. Oh, they're saying the largest states starts with 0 and goes for a length of 5. So 0, but this is, so we go for 5. So that's the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, and the fifth one. I already mentioned that you use shift to remove the first element from the beginning of the array, unshift to add one or more elements to the beginning of the array. And here's some examples. The array's length property can be used for a lot of reasons. Now, one thing I didn't mention before about arrays that I should is that with arrays in most programming languages, not JavaScript, But in most programming languages, once you set the size of an array, you can't change it. In JavaScript, you can. You can add elements. Once you get to the array, you can just make it bigger. And sometimes you, as it says, you use the length property to add it to the next one. We'll go over all this stuff as we're going on. Now, we already looked at shift and unshift to remove or add something to the beginning of an array. Again, pop and push do the same thing, but pop removes the last element of the array, and push adds one or more elements to the end of an array. So where do you want to add the stuff? If you want to add or remove elements within an array someplace, so in other words, not at the beginning or not at the end, you use splice. And until you've gone through and done some practice with this, it probably won't make a whole lot of sense to you. Sort does just what you'd expect it to do with a alphabetic array. All right. So if you want something to be in, so sort sorts it into ascending order. If you want it into descending order, there is no reverse sort. So what you have to do is you have to sort and then call reverse. You can combine two or more arrays together using concat. Converting between data types. Common tasks are to convert strings and arrays to different data types, and they give you some examples here. So notice you've got split, which takes a string and turns it into an array. Sounds a little strange, but for instance, if I had a sentence, hello there, how are you? That's 5 words. And if I put a blank space between each one and I did a split based on that blank space, it would create a new array. The first element would be hello. The second one would be there. The third one would be how. The fourth one would be are. The fifth one would be you, or elements 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let me give a similar example right here. If you want to do the opposite, all right, so if you want to do the opposite of what we just saw here with split, you use join. Join takes an array and combines the elements together into a string. A natural question would be, okay, I've got a string, why would I want to convert it into an array? Or I've got an array, why would I want to convert it into a string? Sometimes you've got a string and there isn't a method that's written that you'd be able to use to manipulate the string the way you want it to. So you convert it into an array because it has that kind of method, or vice versa. All right. You can convert an array to a string with a toString method, or with a toLocale. With a toLocale, that's more a country type of code thing. All right, this chapter ends by talking a little bit about JSON. That's how it's usually pronounced, not JSON, JSON. And it stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And it can be used to represent a JavaScript object as a string. All right, and it only has 2 major methods. Parse, which converts a string to an object, and stringify, which does it reverse. It converts an object into a string. So here's an example. And parse, which again goes the other way. And again, here's an example. All right, so stringify, as we mentioned, converts an object to a string, and parsed converts a string to an object. All right, so we've reached the end of the chapter, and again, I am going to go and 2 things I want to show you quickly. I'm going to go through a bunch of the examples here, but I'm going to do that in another lecture. And once I get done, let's look at the next chapter we're going to go through. In fact, we'll look at the next two, which will be 9 and 10. Okay, chapter 9 is on security, and again, that's one of those chapters that we're not going to spend much time on because we're not going to go over it as a class. So that's chapter 9, and then chapter 10 will be on JavaScript mobile. All right, we will talk a little bit more in length about that. And if you do care, the last two chapters that we'll go over, 11 and 12. I know 12 is on JavaScript. 11 is on AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And as I mentioned, chapter 12, which is a fairly short chapter, okay, that goes over jQuery. All right, so I'm finished now, and when I come back in just a couple minutes, I'm going to be going over, as mentioned, first the JavaScript regex reference, and then JavaScript string methods. So I'll be back with that discussion shortly.